All right, so we've got a good strategy in mind here for how to tackle the shapes that are going to go into making up our monorail emoji design. And again, we want to start by focusing on the shapes that are farthest in the background. And in this design, I would say that's probably the darker part of the pillars here, followed by sort of these lighter pockets, then by the larger light blue rectangle, and this thicker black line, then the shadow of the train, and so on, getting into the actual shapes of the train itself. And luckily, if we don't get this exactly right and we find that later on maybe one shape should be in front of another, that's really easy to change in the layer system of Adobe Illustrator. The important thing is to at least have a concept of which shapes are farthest in the background, which are in the middle ground, which are in the foreground, and use that to help break down your composition. So I'm just going to start with the pen tool here, and I'll be using the default black stroke and white fill. With this assignment, matching the colors of fill and stroke in your design is optional, but at the very least we need to be making closed off vector shapes that represent the overall structure of the composition. So let's just go ahead and start drawing out the rear part of the pillars here. So I'll zoom in a little bit, and I'm just going to start in the lower corner. Now this part's going to be really easy to start off with because this is a very geometric shape, so we just need straight lines, no curves. And when we're working in Illustrator, we can hold down Shift, and that's going to automatically give us either a straight horizontal, straight vertical, or a 45-degree angle path segment. So I can hold down Shift and just click for the next anchor point. Now again, here I'm going straight up vertical, so I'll hold down Shift and snap to that anchor point. Now this is not quite 45 degrees, I can see, so I'll have to sort of eyeball that, but that's okay. So just single click, and that's going to give me the straight path segments that I need here. Now again, I'm going straight horizontal, so I'm holding down Shift. I can see also my smart guides are helping me stick to that horizontal path segment. And this one is not quite 45 degrees, so I'll just go get there as close as I can. So again, just holding Shift when I want to be straight horizontal or straight vertical. This is one place here where it's nice to have smart guides enabled. So if you're not seeing those sort of purple alignment lines, you can go up to your view menu and just check smart guides. But here I can see this is going to help me line up with the bottom of the part of the pillar that I already made. So I'm still holding down Shift and just clicking. And so on and so forth. So again, holding down Shift to get that vertical line. Now this is a part where we want to pay attention to our layering strategy because we're coming up to a border with another shape. So I know that this part of the pillar is the thing farthest in the background of my composition. And in this case, it's not going to make a huge difference how I handle this border because it's just a straight horizontal line and it's very easy. But to start getting the habit of taking advantage of overlaps, I'm going to actually overshoot that border. And that way, when I eventually draw the larger light rectangle that's above it, I don't have to worry about lining things up perfectly. And so that's something that's going to become much more handy when we get to irregular or organic shaped borders. And now you'll notice that when I get back to my first anchor point, my cursor will change to a little O icon next to it. That's telling me I'm about to close off the shape, and I can see I've come all the way around and I've handled that part of the pillars. So I'm making sure that I'm working in the right layer for the right artboard, and I'm making sure that I'm labeling each of these shapes as I go. That way I don't end up with just 30 things that are all labeled path. So this is going to be called pillars. And then next we can tackle the sort of little cutout shapes here that go right in front of each of the pillars. So again, this is where Smart Guides is nice. It's going to help me snap right onto that existing path segment. Now I'm noticing though, as I'm hovering over that path segment, I see the little plus icon next to my pen tool. That's telling me that Illustrator is thinking that I want to add an anchor point to this path rather than start a whole new shape. So rather than click here, I'm going to hold down Shift and notice how my cursor changes to the little asterisk next to it. That lets me start an entire new shape. And we'll start with a vertical line. So I'm going to drag this up right to about the point where it's going to start to change curvature. And then this sort of rounded corner, we're going to handle differently because obviously we don't want it to be a straight path segment. We want it to curve. And the way that I figure out where to draw the next anchor point is by imagining where my path segment would project, if it kept going in the same direction. So, if it kept going sort of straight vertical, right about here, it's going to start to deviate from the profile that I'm trying to trace, which is the rounded corner. So right about there, I'm going to click and drag, and that gives me the control handles, which then in turn gives me a curved path segment. And now I can see, my vector line preview is curving a little bit as I go to draw out the next anchor point. So at the end of the curved radius there, I'll just click, single click, and that gives me back to straight path segment. So I'll hold down Shift and again go right about to where that curved edge starts. And then imagine where that line would project to if it kept going in its original direction, and look for where it starts to deviate from the profile. So right about there, I'll click and drag. Whoops, and that's not quite right. I'm going to hit undo a couple times. Let's try that one more time. And that's looking better. And now again, I'm ready to bring this shape all the way back to where I started. So I'll hover over that first anchor point, and I can see my cursor changes to the little O icon. And I'll click to close it off. So let's zoom out a little bit, and I can see that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and label this. So I'll just call this pillar front. And I'm noticing that this shape here, it looks to be pretty much exactly the same as this one over here. So rather than redraw it, I'm just going to duplicate that shape just by clicking and dragging from the Layers panel and dropping it onto the Create New Layer icon. Then I'll grab my selection tool and just click and drag over to the right. Now, if I have smart guides on, that's going to help me keep everything in that horizontal alignment. I can also, when I'm moving, I can hold down Shift, and that's going to make sure that I just move either straight horizontal or straight vertical. All right, that's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and move on to this larger light blue part of the sort of track shape. And that I think we can just draw out with a rectangle. So I'll click on the rectangle tool. And again here, this is where the smart guides are really nice. That's helping me line up with that left-hand edge of the shape I already drew. And again here, I'm tracking out this border here, so I want to overshoot. And I can just let go and draw out my rectangle. And that way, I don't have to worry about that border being drawn twice. I could make adjustments here if I wanted to. That will become a little bit more clear if I hide my reference layer. All right, so I could take that shape, I could drop it down a little bit, or I could move it up a little bit, and that border is not going to throw me off. So I'm just going to undo to before I did those movements. Let's go ahead and handle this next rectangle. That's sort of like, I guess that's the part of the track that the monorail is riding on. And here, I'm looking ahead to when I'm going to draw sort of the shadow of the monorail and then the train itself. And I know that that is going to automatically overlap with the rectangle I'm drawing right now. So I could just end it here. I could keep going all the way across. I'm just going to do it something like this, and I could tweak it later if I wanted to. Let's make sure that we're still labeling our layers here. I'm going to expand my layers panel a little bit so I can see. So let's call this track base. And then the smaller rectangle, let's call track. All right, so our next shape is going to be the shadow of the monorail. And this will be a little bit more of a challenge because we'll have some organic curves, but we should be able to handle that pretty well with our pen tool. And since I want to butt right up to the edge of my track base here, I'm going to start lining up right on the edge of that rectangle. So go ahead and single click. And for most of this, I want this to be a horizontal line, so I'll hold down Shift. And let's start. And let's look for where that curvature is starting. So it's right about there. I'm going to click. And let's zoom in a little bit. So again, I'm imagining where this line would project out to. I am seeing it's diverging, right about here. So that I can click and hold down the mouse and drag and start to adjust those control handles. And now we still need some more curvature. And so the way that we're going to imagine how that line would project out is by looking at the anchor point and the control handle and sort of projecting out from there. So I can see it's staying pretty close up until right about here. So I'm going to click and drag here, and then let's see if we can get that to match. And that's looking pretty good. And again, when we are making a new path segment that's coming off of an anchor point that has control handles, we'll imagine where that's going to project out to by lining up from the anchor point to the control handle. So I think I can probably set this last anchor point right about here, and that'll look pretty good. Now, of course, we just need to draw a couple straight lines. So we'll take this over and use the smart guides to snap right to the edge of our rectangle, and then come right back around to our initial anchor point. Okay, so that is going to be our train shadow. And again, if I toggle off visibility on our reference layer, you can start to see we're getting those really nice clean overlaps without having to do a lot of extra work tracing borders, twice, once for each shape. So I'm going to keep working on this design, tracing out each of these shapes. I'll include that as a separate video so that you can watch the process if you'd like.